The marble floors of Khalil Al Hakim's 30,000-square-foot mansion gleamed under crystal chandeliers as he walked through the grand foyer, speaking animatedly into his phone about a business deal that would net his investment firm another $50 million by the end of the week. What he didn't notice were the tiny cameras hidden in picture frames, the sophisticated listening devices embedded in decorative vases, and the network of surveillance equipment that had been secretly installed throughout his Beverly Hills estate by people who wanted to destroy him. But Amara Williams, the soft-spoken housekeeper who had been cleaning his home for 3 years, had discovered the surveillance operation during her morning rounds and was about to deliver a warning that would save his empire while revealing that the woman he had barely acknowledged possessed skills and knowledge that could protect him from enemies he never knew he had. Khalil's phone conversation centered on acquiring a struggling technology company whose artificial intelligence patents would give his portfolio companies a competitive advantage worth hundreds of millions in future revenue. But his excited discussion of insider information and market manipulation tactics was being recorded by federal investigators who had been building a case against him for securities fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy to commit financial crimes that could result in decades in federal prison. The mansion itself had been designed as a fortress of privacy, with soundproof rooms, encrypted communication systems, and security measures that Khalil believed made it impossible for outsiders to monitor his activities. The irony was that his confidence in these protections had made him careless about what he discussed within his own home, never suspecting that federal agents had spent months developing techniques to penetrate his defenses through methods that exploited his trust in expensive security technology. The investigation had been ongoing for 18 months, initiated by suspicious trading patterns that suggested Khalil's investment decisions were based on non-public information obtained through bribery, coercion, and industrial espionage that violated multiple federal statutes designed to prevent wealthy individuals from using their resources to manipulate markets at the expense of ordinary investors who lacked access to insider knowledge. Federal prosecutors had been building their case methodically, starting with financial records analysis that revealed impossible patterns of profitable trades that could only be explained by access to confidential information, then expanding their investigation to include wiretaps, surveillance, and cooperation from whistleblowers who had worked within Khalil's organization and witnessed illegal activities firsthand. The complexity of white-collar criminal investigations required years of evidence gathering to establish patterns of behavior that demonstrated criminal intent rather than simply fortunate investment decisions, because wealthy defendants could afford sophisticated legal representation that would challenge every aspect of the prosecution's case unless the evidence was overwhelming and irrefutable. Amara had been working the early morning shift when she noticed that some of the decorative objects in Khalil's home office had been moved slightly from their usual positions, a detail that her trained observation skills had immediately flagged as evidence of unauthorized entry by someone who had attempted to replace surveillance equipment without leaving obvious traces of their presence. Her background in military intelligence, earned during 8 years of service in the Army before transitioning to civilian employment that paid significantly less but allowed her to support her elderly mother and disabled brother, had taught her to recognize the subtle signs of professional surveillance operations and the techniques that law enforcement agencies used to gather evidence for criminal prosecutions. The military training had included extensive education about counterintelligence operations, surveillance detection, and the methods that hostile foreign governments used to gather information about American military and economic activities, providing her with knowledge that translated directly to understanding domestic law enforcement techniques used in federal criminal investigations. Her transition from military service to civilian employment had been complicated by the challenge of translating specialized intelligence skills into qualifications that civilian employers could understand and value, because much of her military experience involved classified activities that could not be discussed in detail during job interviews or included on standard employment applications. The decision to accept employment as a housekeeper had been motivated by economic necessity rather than career preference, because her military training in cybersecurity and intelligence analysis had not translated into civilian job opportunities that matched her qualifications, forcing her to take whatever work was available while she completed college courses that might eventually lead to better employment in her field of expertise. The domestic work itself had provided unexpected advantages for someone with intelligence training because household staff were often treated as invisible by wealthy employers who conducted sensitive business discussions without considering that their employees might possess the knowledge and skills necessary to understand the significance of what they were overhearing. Khalil's casual discussions of illegal activities during her presence had created ethical dilemmas for Amara, who understood that she was witnessing criminal behavior, but also recognized that her immigration status and economic vulnerability made it dangerous for her to report such activities to authorities who might view her as an unreliable witness or potential accomplice. Khalil continued his phone conversation as he moved through the mansion's various rooms, unaware that every word was being transmitted to federal agents who were documenting his admission of crimes that would provide sufficient evidence for indictments that could destroy not only his business empire, but also his family's reputation and financial security. The beauty of this deal is that nobody will see it coming, Khalil said into his phone. His voice carrying the confidence of someone who believed his wealth and connections made him immune from legal consequences. By the time the market realizes what's happening, we'll have made our profit and moved on to the next opportunity. The casual discussion of market manipulation demonstrated exactly the kind of criminal behavior that federal prosecutors had been hoping to document through their surveillance operation, because Khalil's own words would provide irrefutable evidence of intent to commit securities fraud that would be impossible to defend against in court. His business model had evolved over years, from legitimate investment activities into increasingly sophisticated schemes that generated enormous profits through manipulation of stock prices, exploitation of confidential information, and coordination with other wealthy investors who shared inside knowledge that gave them unfair advantages over ordinary market participants. The progression from legal to illegal activities had been gradual enough that Khalil had rationalized each step as simply being more aggressive and sophisticated than his competitors, without acknowledging that he had crossed lines that transformed his business practices from shrewd investing into criminal conspiracy that violated securities laws designed to protect market integrity. Amara followed at a discreet distance, her cleaning supplies providing cover for her presence while she observed Khalil's movements, and waited for an opportunity to warn him about the surveillance, without revealing her own background or compromising her employment situation. The challenge was that interrupting Khalil's business conversation would require her to violate the social boundaries that wealthy employers established to maintain separation between themselves and their domestic staff, but allowing him to continue incriminating himself would result in consequences that extended far beyond his individual situation, to include the dozens of employees whose livelihoods depended on his business operations. Her concern for innocent employees was based on her understanding of how federal investigations typically developed, with prosecutors using evidence against primary targets to pressure cooperation that often resulted in broader charges against people who had been unaware of their employer's criminal activities, but who could be portrayed as knowing participants in ongoing conspiracies. The federal investigation had already identified several of Khalil's business associates and employees who might face charges based on their involvement in transactions that prosecutors would characterize as part of a broader criminal enterprise. Even though many of these individuals had no knowledge of the illegal aspects of their work and believed they were engaged in legitimate business activities. We have inside information about their research and development projects that gives us a significant advantage over other bidders, Khalil continued. His admission of insider trading delivered with the casual confidence of someone who had never considered the possibility that his private conversations might be monitored by law enforcement agencies. The revelation that he possessed non-public information about the target company's proprietary research provided federal investigators with exactly the kind of evidence they needed to prove that his investment decisions were based on illegally obtained insider knowledge rather than legitimate market analysis. The source of his insider information was a network of corporate executives, government officials, and professional service providers who traded confidential information in exchange for financial compensation and investment opportunities that generated enormous profits for everyone involved in the conspiracy, creating a web of criminal liability that extended far beyond Khalil's individual activities. Amara's military intelligence training had taught her that surveillance operations typically involved multiple layers of monitoring equipment designed to capture both audio and visual evidence, and her examination of Khalil's office had revealed sophisticated recording devices that suggested a well-funded investigation with access to advanced technology. The federal agents conducting the surveillance had obtained warrants based on evidence provided by whistleblowers who had worked for Khalil's investment firm and witnessed firsthand the illegal activities that generated extraordinary profits through manipulation of stock prices and exploitation of confidential information obtained through bribery and industrial espionage. The whistleblower testimony had provided prosecutors with sufficient probable cause to obtain judicial authorization for extensive surveillance operations that included wiretaps, hidden cameras, and infiltration of Khalil's business operations through undercover agents who posed as potential business partners and investment clients. The scope of the federal investigation extended beyond Khalil's individual activities to encompass a broader examination of systematic corruption in the investment industry, where wealthy individuals and institutions had developed sophisticated methods for circumventing securities regulations and exploiting ordinary investors through coordinated manipulation of market prices and information asymmetries. The key is timing our purchases to maximize profit while minimizing the risk of detection, Khalil explained to his caller, apparently unaware that his detailed discussion of criminal conspiracy was providing prosecutors with a roadmap for their case against him. The phone conversation continued as Khalil moved into his home office, where the concentration of surveillance equipment was highest because federal agents expected that his most incriminating discussions would take place in the private space where he conducted sensitive business without the presence of witnesses who might later testify about his illegal activities. The office itself had been designed as a secure communication center with encrypted internet connections, secure phone lines, and signal blocking technology that was supposed to prevent unauthorized monitoring of his business activities. But federal agents had overcome these protections through sophisticated techniques that exploited vulnerabilities in his security systems. Amara realized that she could no longer delay her intervention because Khalil's continued discussion of criminal activities was providing investigators with evidence that would be sufficient to support charges carrying mandatory minimum sentences that would effectively end his freedom, regardless of his wealth or legal representation. "Mr. Al Hakim," she said quietly, approaching him with the respectful demeanor that domestic workers learn to adopt when addressing wealthy employers. Though her voice carried an urgency that suggested something more important than routine household matters. "Can this wait?" Khalil replied impatiently, his hand covering the phone's microphone, as he acknowledged her presence, with the kind of irritation that wealthy people often displayed when interrupted by service staff during important business discussions. "They're recording you," Amara whispered urgently, her military training overriding her civilian employment protocols as she prioritized his safety over social conventions about appropriate interaction between employers and domestic staff. The warning hit Khalil like a physical blow, because the implications of what Amara was telling him meant that his private business conversations had been compromised and that everything he had been discussing could be used as evidence in criminal proceedings that would destroy his life and freedom. "What are you talking about?" he asked, his voice dropping to a whisper, as he told his caller that he would need to continue their conversation later due to an unexpected development that required his immediate attention. "There are surveillance devices throughout your house," Amara explained quietly, her knowledge of intelligence gathering techniques allowing her to identify the specific locations where recording equipment had been installed. Professional-grade equipment that suggests federal law enforcement involvement. The revelation that his home had been infiltrated by federal agents transformed Khalil's understanding of his situation from routine business success to existential threat, because the evidence they had been gathering could support charges that would result in decades of imprisonment, regardless of his financial resources or legal connections. "How do you know about surveillance equipment?" Khalil asked, his confusion about how his housekeeper could possess knowledge about federal investigative techniques, creating cognitive dissonance as he tried to reconcile her apparent expertise with his assumptions about her background and Qualifications. I served 8 years in military intelligence before taking this job, Amara replied simply, her explanation revealing capabilities that Khalil had never suspected, despite their years of professional interaction in his home. The disclosure that his housekeeper possessed advanced training in intelligence operations and surveillance detection created a complete reversal in their relationship dynamic, as Khalil realized that the person he had been treating as invisible might be the only one who could help him navigate the legal crisis that threatened to destroy everything he had built. Can you show me where the devices are located? Khalil asked, his business instincts recognizing that accurate information about the scope of surveillance would be crucial for developing strategies to minimize legal exposure and protect his business interests. Amara led him through the mansion, pointing out the carefully concealed cameras and listening devices that had been integrated into his home's decor with professional skill that would have been invisible to anyone without specialized training in counter-surveillance techniques. This one, in the picture frame, has been recording video of your desk area, she explained, indicating a device that had been disguised as a decorative element, but which contained sophisticated recording equipment capable of capturing high-definition video and audio. The tour of surveillance equipment revealed the extensive scope of the federal investigation, with monitoring devices positioned to capture evidence from every area where Khalil conducted business or discussed sensitive matters, creating a comprehensive record of his activities that would provide prosecutors with overwhelming evidence for their case. How long do you think this has been going on? Khalil asked, his mind racing as he calculated the potential damage from months or years of recorded conversations that might contain admissions of illegal activities. Based on the equipment installation and wear patterns, I'd estimate at least 6 months, Amara replied, her analysis based on professional experience with surveillance operations and her knowledge of how federal investigations typically developed over time. The timeline that Amara provided meant that federal agents had been gathering evidence during a period when Khalil had been particularly active in questionable business deals, including several transactions that had generated enormous profits through methods that would be difficult to defend as legitimate investment activities. What should I do? Khalil asked, his question revealing vulnerability that he had never displayed in their previous interactions. Because his wealth and status provided no protection against federal criminal prosecution based on recorded evidence of his own admissions. You need to assume that everything you've said in this house for the past 6 months has been recorded and could be used against you, Amara advised, her military training providing strategic thinking about damage control and legal exposure that Khalil's business experience had not prepared him to handle. The implication that his private conversations had been compromised for months meant that federal prosecutors likely possessed extensive evidence of criminal activities that would be sufficient to support multiple felony charges with penalties that could include decades of imprisonment and forfeiture of his business assets. I need to contact my lawyers immediately, Khalil said, his recognition that legal representation would be crucial for navigating federal criminal charges, representing a fundamental shift from his previous confidence about his immunity from legal consequences. Be careful about what you say on any phone in this house, Amara warned, her understanding of surveillance techniques extending to the possibility that his communications equipment had also been compromised by federal investigators seeking to gather additional evidence. The warning about compromised communications highlighted the sophisticated nature of the investigation and the possibility that federal agents had access to multiple sources of information about Khalil's activities, making it crucial for him to assume that any discussion of legal strategy or business matters could be monitored. How do you know so much about federal investigations? Khalil asked, his curiosity about Amara's background growing as he realized that her expertise exceeded what he would have expected from military intelligence service alone. After leaving the military, I worked briefly for a private security firm that specialized in counter-surveillance and corporate protection, Amara explained, her career path revealing additional qualifications that had been hidden behind her current employment as domestic staff. The revelation that Amara possessed professional experience with exactly the type of situation that Khalil was facing created an opportunity for him to access expertise that could be crucial for protecting his interests during the federal crime investigation. Would you be willing to help me develop a strategy for dealing with this surveillance? Khalil asked, his proposal representing a complete transformation in their relationship, from employer and domestic worker to potential business partners facing a common threat. "I can provide advice about counter-surveillance and investigation procedures," Amara replied, her willingness to help based on professional ethics rather than personal loyalty, because she understood that federal investigations often involved collateral damage to innocent employees whose livelihoods depended on businesses that came under legal scrutiny. The offer of professional assistance created an opportunity for Khalil to access specialized knowledge that could make the difference between minimizing legal exposure and facing decades of imprisonment, while providing Amara with a chance to utilize her advanced training in a way that matched her qualifications. Over the following hours, Amara's analysis of the surveillance operation revealed the sophisticated nature of the federal investigation and the likelihood that prosecutors possessed sufficient evidence to support charges that would be difficult to defend through conventional legal strategies. The scope and professional quality of this surveillance suggests a well-funded investigation with access to advanced technology, she explained. Her assessment based on detailed examination of the equipment and installation techniques that had been used throughout Khalil's home. The professional assessment confirmed Khalil's worst fears about the seriousness of his legal situation, but it also provided strategic information that could be used to develop defense strategies and minimize potential consequences through cooperation or plea negotiations. "What are my realistic options for protecting my business and avoiding prison?" Khalil asked, his question reflecting acceptance that his previous lifestyle and business practices would need to change dramatically, regardless of how the legal situation was resolved. "Your best option is probably cooperation with federal prosecutors in exchange for reduced charges and sentencing," Amara advised, her experience with federal investigations suggesting that wealthy defendants who provided valuable information often received more favorable treatment than those who attempted to fight charges with overwhelming evidence. The recommendation that he consider cooperation represented a fundamental shift from Khalil's previous approach to legal challenges, which had relied on expensive lawyers and political connections rather than accepting responsibility for illegal activities. "I would need guarantees about protection for my employees and business operations," Khalil said, his concern for the people whose livelihoods depended on his companies revealing character traits that had been hidden behind his ruthless business persona. The expression of concern for employee welfare suggested that beneath Khalil's criminal business practices lay genuine care for people whose success was connected to his own, creating possibilities for redemption that extended beyond simple legal damage control. Federal prosecutors are often willing to negotiate protection for businesses and employees in exchange for comprehensive cooperation from defendants who can provide valuable information about broader criminal networks. Amara explained, her knowledge of prosecution strategies offering hope for outcomes that could preserve jobs and business operations. The possibility that cooperation could protect innocent employees provided Khalil with motivation to accept responsibility for his own actions while working to minimize harm to people who had not been involved in his illegal activities. Over the following weeks, Amara's expertise in intelligence operations and federal investigations proved invaluable, as Khalil navigated plea negotiations that ultimately resulted in reduced charges, preservation of his business operations under court supervision, and protection for employees who had been unaware of his criminal activities. The plea agreement required Khalil to forfeit substantial assets and accept restrictions on his future business activities, but it also allowed him to maintain control of companies that provided employment for hundreds of people and contributed valuable services to their communities under federal oversight that ensured compliance with all applicable laws. The cooperation agreement involved providing prosecutors with detailed information about the broader network of corruption that had facilitated his illegal activities, leading to additional investigations and prosecutions that disrupted systematic fraud throughout the investment industry and recovered hundreds of millions of dollars for defrauded investors. The housekeeper, who had saved her employer from decades in federal prison, became his chief security officer and business partner, applying her intelligence training to help rebuild his companies on legal foundations that could generate legitimate profits while contributing positively to their communities. Before we wrap this story up, I'd like to congratulate you for reaching this far. And if you enjoyed this story as much as I think you did, then be sure to check out the rest of our channel for more exciting and inspirational stories like this one. And don't forget to show your support by liking and subscribing so this channel can reach more people just like you. Now, back to the story. Years later, when Khalil's businesses had been transformed into ethical enterprises that provided good jobs and valuable services, he would reflect on the morning when a warning whispered by someone he had barely noticed had saved him from destroying everything that mattered in his life. The surveillance operation that had been designed to destroy his empire had instead become the catalyst for transformation that revealed the hidden talents of people he had ignored and the possibility for redemption that existed even in the darkest circumstances. The millionaire who had been walking blindly toward his own destruction had been saved by someone whose intelligence and loyalty had been hidden behind the invisible uniform of domestic service, proving that the most valuable protection often came from people whose worth could not be measured by their job titles or social status.